Have you ever judged someone too quickly, only to discover the weight of pain they were carrying beneath their sharp words? Today's story plunges deep into the thorny terrain of hasty judgment and the transformative power of compassion. In a world where we're quick to categorize others by their worst moments, this tale might just change how you see the strangers who cross your path. The small wooden cross dangled from Miguel Alvarez's rearview mirror, swinging gently with each pothole his yellow taxi encountered on the rain-slicked streets of Philadelphia. 47 years of life had etched permanent creases around his eyes, not from laughter, but from squinting through fog and rain on countless midnight shifts. His weathered hands, calloused from 12 years gripping the same steering wheel, tapped an irregular rhythm as he waited for the dispatcher's voice to crackle through his radio. Unit 12, pick up at Rittenhouse Square, westbound service to Haverford. Customer requested your cab specifically. Miguel frowned, glancing at the clock on his dashboard. 7:12 in the evening, an odd time for someone to request him by name. Most of his regulars were morning people, elderly churchgoers, businessmen with predictable schedules, medical staff finishing overnight shifts. He couldn't recall the last westbound fare to Haverford he'd driven. Roger that. ETA 7 minutes. The October rain fell in relentless sheets, transforming the city into a glistening, treacherous maze. Pedestrians huddled under storefronts, clutching collapsed umbrellas rendered useless by the gusting wind. As Miguel navigated through the narrow streets, the cross swung more frantically, almost like a warning. He'd started his day as he had for the past 3,422 days since Rebecca's diagnosis, with prayer. Simple, desperate prayers that had evolved from bargaining to acceptance, and finally, to gratitude. Today, he'd prayed for patience. The irony wasn't lost on him as he pulled up to the curb where a young woman stood without an umbrella, seemingly oblivious to the downpour soaking her expensive-looking striped blouse and dark hair. "You're late," she snapped as she yanked open the back door and slid inside, bringing with her the scent of rain and something floral and expensive. "I specifically requested the Hispanic driver who knows the back routes to Haverford." Miguel bit back a retort. The woman couldn't be older than 30, with dark hair falling in wet strands around a face that might have been beautiful, if not contorted with impatience. Her striped blouse clung to her shoulders, and her makeup had begun to run in thin black streaks down her cheeks. "Good evening, miss. The name's Miguel Alvarez," he said, meeting her eyes briefly in the rearview mirror. "Traffic's backed up on Market Street. I'll take the Riverside route." "Whatever. Just hurry. I don't have time for the scenic tour." She was already on her phone, manicured fingers flying across the screen, completely dismissing him. Miguel pulled away from the curb, offering a silent prayer that now seemed more necessity than routine. "Lord, grant me patience with this one." The woman barked instructions into her phone, her voice growing increasingly brittle. "No, I don't care what Dr. Simmons said. Keep him comfortable until I get there. I'm in a taxi now." A hospital, Miguel realized. Not Haverford College, as he'd assumed. The tension in her voice shifted in his perception, from entitlement to something that might be fear. "Miss, which hospital in Haverford are we heading to?" "Bryn Mawr," she replied curtly, not looking up from her phone. "And don't try to run up the meter. I know exactly how long this should take." Miguel nodded, swallowing another retort. 7 years ago, he might have ejected her from his cab for such disrespect. But 7 years ago, Rebecca hadn't yet taught him that anger often wore the disguise of pain. They rode in tense silence for 12 minutes before the woman spoke again. "Can't this thing go any faster?" Her knuckles had whitened around her phone. "I'm already 5 over the limit, miss. Getting pulled over won't get you there any quicker." She made a disgusted sound, but said nothing more. Miguel watched her in his mirror. Despite her harsh demeanor, there was something familiar in her anxiety. The way her eyes darted to check the time every few seconds, the barely controlled tremor in her hands. He'd worn that same expression for months during Rebecca's treatment. "Is it family?" he asked quietly. "At the hospital?" For a moment, her mask slipped, revealing raw vulnerability beneath. Then her expression hardened again. "That's none of your business. Just drive." Ah! The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of the taxi like impatient fingers. Miguel's wipers struggled against the deluge, and he slowed slightly to compensate for the reduced visibility. "No, no, no," the woman muttered. "Why are you slowing down?" "Safety, miss. Can't help anyone if we hydroplane into a guardrail." She let out a strangled sound that might have been a sob disguised as frustration. Miguel pretended not to notice, but he found himself pressing the accelerator just a little harder once they reached a straight stretch of road. Traffic congested as they approached the city limits. Red taillights blurred through the rain-streaked windshield, forming a river of crimson that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. The woman's breathing quickened. "This isn't happening," she whispered, more to herself than to Miguel. "Not today of all days." Miguel considered his options, then made a decision that could cost him his license if reported. He eased the taxi onto the shoulder and began to carefully navigate past the stalled traffic. "What are you doing?" the woman asked, suddenly alert. "Getting you to someone who needs you," Miguel replied simply. "Hold tight." For 7 minutes, they crawled along the shoulder, Miguel's experienced eyes scanning constantly for police or obstacles. When they finally emerged from the worst of the congestion, the woman had fallen silent, watching him with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she said finally, the words seeming to cost her considerable effort. Miguel nodded. "My wife spent 3 years in and out of hospitals. I know what it's like to race against time that won't slow down." Something in the woman's expression shifted, but she turned away, staring out at the rain-blurred landscape passing outside her window. "His name is Edward," she said after a long pause. "My father, he's dying." The words hung in the space between them, heavy with finality. "I'm sorry," Miguel said, meaning it. "Don't be. He's been dying for years." Her bitter laugh contained no humor. "Liver failure. Self-inflicted. He chose the bottle over his family consistently for 30 years. Miguel remained silent, recognizing that sometimes people didn't need responses. They needed release. "I haven't spoken to him in 7 years, she continued. 7 years of blissful silence. And now he's actually dying, and my brother thinks I need to say goodbye." She straightened her striped blouse with trembling fingers. "As if a deathbed makes everything forgivable." The wooden cross swung as Miguel navigated a sharp turn, the woman's eyes fixed on it. "You're religious," she observed. "Not quite a question." "I have faith," Miguel corrected gently. "Not always in religion, but in grace." "Grace?" She repeated the word, as if tasting something unfamiliar. "Did your wife survive?" The question was abrupt, almost intrusive, but Miguel recognized it for what it was. A drowning person grasping for hope. "No," he said softly. "Rebecca died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer." "Then what good was your faith?" The challenge in her voice was undercut by genuine confusion. Miguel considered this as they passed the sign welcoming them to Haverford Township. The rain had lightened to a gentle patter, almost apologetic for its earlier fury. "Faith didn't save her life," he acknowledged, "but it saved mine afterward." From the private journal of Camilla Vega, October 12th. "I didn't want to go. 7 years of silence felt like barely enough to dull the edges of what he did to us, to Mom, to Thomas, to me. 7 years of building a life where Edward Vega existed only as a genetic contributor to my dark hair and quick temper. Now here I am, in a hospital room that smells of disinfectant and approaching death, watching him sleep. He looks small. How is that possible? The monster of my childhood reduced to 73 pounds of yellowed skin and fragile bones. The taxi driver who brought me here, Miguel, told me something I can't shake. He said, "Forgiveness isn't saying what happened was okay. It's saying you won't let it poison your future." He lost his wife, but speaks of grace like someone who found treasure in ruins. Meanwhile, I've built a fortress around a wound that's never healed, calling it strength. Dad's doctor says he might not wake up again. Part of me hopes he doesn't. What could we possibly say to each other after everything? But another part, a part I've tried to silence for 7 years, keeps remembering how he taught me to ride a bike before the drinking got bad. How he cried at my piano recital when I was 9. The nurse just came in. His vitals are dropping. I have to decide now who I want to be in this moment that will never come again. The hospital corridor stretched before Camilla like an accusation. Antiseptic scent mingled with the lingering aroma of cafeteria coffee as she paced, her still damp striped blouse clinging uncomfortably to her skin. 3 hours had passed since Miguel had dropped her off with an awkward but sincere offer to wait. She dismissed him curtly, then regretted it almost immediately. Now, as midnight approached, she found herself wishing for his quiet presence. There was something steadying about the taxi driver with the weathered face and gentle eyes that had seen their own share of suffering. The door to room 312 opened, and Thomas emerged, his face drawn with exhaustion. At 35, her brother looked a decade older, the toll of being their father's caretaker etched into the premature grey at his temples. "He's asking for you," Thomas said, his voice rough from unshed tears. "He's lucid. Dr. Harrison says it happens sometimes near the end." A final rally. Camilla's heart hammered against her ribs. For hours, she'd sat beside her father's unconscious form, rehearsing speeches that oscillated between forgiveness and recrimination. Now that the moment had arrived, words abandoned her entirely. "I can't," she whispered. Thomas's expression hardened. "He's dying, Cam. Whatever you're holding on to, is it worth carrying it after he's gone?" The question hung between them, unanswerable yet demanding response. Camilla thought of Miguel's words about grace, about his wife Rebecca, whom faith couldn't save, but somehow redeemed in memory. What if I don't know how to forgive him? The vulnerability in her voice surprised her. Thomas's expression softened. He reached for her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of their childhood solidarity against their father's drunken rages that Camilla nearly broke. "Maybe forgiveness isn't something you know how to do," he suggested quietly. "Maybe it's something you choose, moment by moment, until it becomes real." The door to room 312 loomed before her like a threshold between two possible futures, one where she remained safely ensconced in her anger, and another unknown landscape where letting go might either heal or destroy her. "I'll try," she promised, squeezing her brother's hand before releasing it. Edward Vega's skeletal frame barely disturbed the hospital blanket covering him. His once imposing presence, 6 feet 2 inches of volatile energy that had dominated their childhood home, had diminished to hollow cheeks and papery skin stretched over protruding bones. Only his eyes remained unchanged, the same deep brown that Camilla saw in her own mirror every morning. Those eyes fixed on her now, widening in recognition and something that might have been shame. "Camilla," he whispered, her name emerging as a rasp. "You came." She stood frozen just inside the doorway, the speech she'd mentally prepared evaporating under the weight of his gaze. "Thomas called me," she said finally, the words inadequate and stiff. Edward nodded slightly, the movement clearly costing him effort. "I didn't deserve that kindness from him, or from you." The simple acknowledgement, devoid of excuses or justifications, caught her off guard. Throughout her childhood, Edward had never once admitted fault, even when confronted with the undeniable evidence of his destructive behavior. Camilla moved closer to the bed, perching awkwardly on the edge of the chair Thomas had vacated. Up close, the ravages of alcoholism were even more evident, the spider web of burst blood vessels across Edward's nose, the yellowish tint to his sclera, the slight tremor in his hands even at rest. "The doctors say," she began. "I know what they say," Edward interrupted, his voice stronger for a moment. "I'm dying, finally paying for everything." The bitterness in his tone was familiar, but for once it wasn't directed outward at an unfair world or an unsupportive family. It coiled inward, self-recriminating. "I didn't come to watch you punish yourself," Camilla said, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. "Why did you come then?" The question contained no challenge, only genuine bewilderment. Camilla considered this, searching herself for the truth beneath layers of rehearsed responses. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "Maybe because some part of me remembers who you were before." Edward's eyes filled with tears. "I remember too. Not always. The drinking, it steals memories. But sometimes I remember teaching you to ride your blue bicycle. You were so determined, and fell 7 times but wouldn't quit." 12 times, Camilla corrected, the corner of her mouth lifting despite herself. "Mom counted." A ghost of a smile touched Edward's cracked lips. "Sounds like her." The mention of her mother should have reignited Camilla's anger. Elizabeth Vega had withered under the weight of Edward's alcoholism, dying of breast cancer that went undetected too long because Edward's dramas always demanded center stage. Instead, Camilla felt an unexpected wave of compassion for both her parents, trapped in patterns neither had known how to break. "Dad," she said, the term feeling foreign on her tongue after so many years of referring to him as Edward, or simply my father, in the most clinical sense. "I didn't come to forgive you." His face fell, but he nodded in acceptance. "I came because I need to stop letting what happened poison who I am now," she continued. "The taxi driver who brought me here, his wife died, but he talks about grace like it saved him. I don't understand that kind of faith, but I want to." Edward studied her face, as if memorizing it for whatever came next. "You look like your mother," he said softly, "but you have my stubbornness. Use it better than I did." A knock at the door interrupted them. A nurse entered, followed by Dr. Harrison, whose grave expression confirmed what the machine's changing rhythms had already begun to announce. "It's time for his medication, Miss Vega," the nurse said gently. "It will make him more comfortable, but it will also make him sleep." The unspoken subtext was clear. This might be their final conversation. Camilla nodded, suddenly desperate to say everything that remained unsaid, yet unable to articulate any of it. How do you compress a lifetime of complex emotions into a few final moments? "I'll stay," she said instead, the simple promise containing multitudes. As the nurse administered the medication, Edward's eyes remained fixed on Camilla's face. His hand, once strong enough to break a door in anger, now barely able to lift a cup, reached for hers. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. "I have to tell you," he whispered urgently as the medication began to take effect. "The accident. 7 years ago." Camilla stiffened. The accident had been the final break between them. Edward, drunk behind the wheel, had struck a pedestrian. The man had survived, but Edward's refusal to take responsibility, his endless excuses, had been the last straw for Camilla. "Dad, don't, please," he interrupted, his grip tightening with surprising strength. "The man I hit, I never knew his name. The police wouldn't tell me, but I saw his face every night in my nightmares." Now Camilla frowned, confused by this unexpected direction. "Yesterday," Edward continued, his words beginning to slur as the medication took hold, "when they brought me in, a nurse recognized my name, said her husband had been looking for me, to forgive me." His eyes were drifting closed, but he fought to keep them open. "His name is Miguel Alvarez." The world seemed to tilt beneath Camilla. The taxi driver's face flashed in her mind, the weathered skin, the kind eyes, the cross swinging from his rearview mirror. The grace he spoke of took on new, impossible dimensions. "Miguel?" she repeated, her voice barely audible. "My taxi driver?" But Edward's eyes had closed, his breathing settling into the shallow rhythm of drug-induced sleep. Dr. Harrison approached, placing a gentle hand on Camilla's shoulder. "He probably won't wake again," she said softly. "The medication helps with the pain, but in his condition," Camilla nodded numbly, her mind reeling with the implications of her father's revelation. Had Miguel known who she was when he picked her up? Had he recognized the name Vega when she'd made the reservation? Or had he unknowingly driven the daughter of the man who had nearly killed him to a deathbed reconciliation? "I need to make a call," she said, rising shakily from her chair. "I'll be right back." In the hallway, Camilla's trembling fingers scrolled through her recent calls until she found the number for the taxi company. The dispatcher answered on the fourth ring, sounding harried. "Valley Yellow Cab." "I need to reach one of your drivers," Camilla said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Miguel Alvarez. He dropped me at Bryn Mawr Hospital earlier tonight." "Hold on." The sound of typing filled the pause. "Alvarez ended his shift at 11. Won't be back on until tomorrow morning? Want to leave a message?" Disappointment washed over Camilla. "No, She stopped, reconsidering. "Yes, please tell him Camila Vega called. Tell him I understand about Grace now." After hanging up, Camilla returned to room 312, where Thomas had joined the vigil. They sat on opposite sides of their father's bed, the only sound the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the rasp of labored breathing. "He told me something," Camilla said, eventually, breaking the heavy silence. "About the accident." Thomas looked up, his expression guarded. The accident had been his breaking point too. Though he'd maintained minimal contact with their father out of a sense of duty, Camilla had never fully understood. "The man he hit," she continued, "it was Miguel Alvarez." Thomas frowned. "Who?" "The taxi driver who brought me here tonight." The coincidence, or something more than coincidence, still seemed impossible. Dad said a nurse recognized his name, said Miguel had been looking for him, to forgive him. Understanding dawned in Thomas's eyes, followed quickly by disbelief. That can't be." "I know," Camilla agreed. "But what are the odds that out of all the taxi drivers in Philadelphia, I'd get the one man whose life Dad nearly destroyed? The one person who had every right to hate him but chose Grace instead?" Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of their father in his rare, sober moments that Camilla's chest tightened. "Maybe it's what you said earlier," she continued quietly. "Maybe forgiveness isn't something you know how to do. Maybe it's something that finds you when you need it most." They fell silent again, watching the shallow rise and fall of their father's chest. Outside the window the rain had stopped, leaving behind a world washed clean and waiting for dawn. Miguel Alvarez's yellow taxi idled outside Bryn Mawr Hospital as morning light crept across the parking lot. He'd arrived an hour before his shift officially began, drawn by a message relayed by the night dispatcher that had kept him awake through what remained of the night. "Camila Vega called, says she understands about Grace now." The name had struck him like a physical blow. Vega. He'd known the last name of the drunk driver who had hit him 7 years ago, shattering his leg in 3 places and ending his construction career. Edward Vega had been sentenced to probation and community service, a punishment Miguel had initially found insulting for the pain and career loss he'd suffered. Rebecca's illness had come 3 months after the accident, while Miguel was still learning to walk again. The coincidence of timing had seemed like cosmic cruelty then, his body broken just in time to be unable to properly care for his dying wife. It had taken Miguel 3 years to find his way to forgiveness, and another 2 to actively search for Edward Vega, not for retribution, but for the release Miguel himself needed. His inquiries had led nowhere, as if the man had disappeared, and now, through what could only be described as divine choreography, he had unknowingly driven Vega's daughter to his hospital bed. The hospital entrance doors slid open and Camilla emerged, her striped blouse replaced by a wrinkled T-shirt that looked borrowed, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Even from a distance, Miguel could see the redness around her eyes, the slight sway in her step that spoke of exhaustion beyond mere fatigue. Without conscious decision, he stepped out of his taxi and raised a hand in greeting. She spotted him immediately, freezing mid-step before changing direction and walking purposefully toward him. They faced each other across 3 feet of damp pavement, the early morning light casting long shadows between them. "He died an hour ago," Camilla said without preamble, her voice rough but composed. "Peacefully, Thomas and I were both there. Miguel nodded, unsure what response was expected or appropriate. I'm sorry for your loss, he offered finally. Are you? The question contained no accusation, only genuine curiosity. After what he did to you, so she knew. The realization that Edward Vega had confessed the connection between them in his final hours stirred something unexpected in Miguel's chest. Not the old anger or resentment, but a quiet sense of completion. Yes, he said simply. I am sorry. For your loss, for his suffering, for all of it. Camilla studied his face with an intensity that might have made him uncomfortable under different circumstances. Why did you drive me to him? She asked finally. If you knew who I was, who he was, why help me get to his side? I didn't know, Miguel admitted. Not until your message came through last night. The name Vega isn't uncommon. I never made the connection. Disbelief flickered across her features, followed by something like wonder. That's impossible. The coincidence. I stopped believing in coincidence when Rebecca got sick right after my accident, Miguel interrupted gently. Some things defy explanation, but not meaning. The wooden cross that had hung from his rearview mirror for 12 years now rested in his pocket. He extracted it, the worn surface smooth against his palm. This belonged to Rebecca, he explained, offering it to Camilla. She held it through every chemotherapy session, said it reminded her that suffering is never the end of the story. Camilla made no move to take it, her hands remaining firmly at her sides. I'm not religious, she said, echoing her statement from the previous night. Neither was I. For a long time after Rebecca died, Miguel acknowledged, but faith found me anyway, in the spaces grief left behind. The morning sun had fully cleared the horizon now, turning the hospital windows into panels of gold. A shift change was underway, medical staff in fresh scrubs passing others with the rumpled look of a completed night shift. My brother asked if I wanted a ride home, Camilla said, changing the subject abruptly. I told him I'd find my own way back. Miguel recognized the unspoken request. I can take you, wherever you need to go. She nodded, moving toward the passenger door of his taxi rather than the back seat. The gesture wasn't lost on Miguel. No longer driver and fare, but two people connected by an improbable thread of circumstance. As they settled into the cab, Miguel placed the wooden cross on the dashboard between them. Camilla eyed it warily but didn't object. Where to? Miguel asked, turning the key in the ignition. Camilla hesitated, looking out at the hospital where her father's body remained, but his presence had already begun to fade. I don't know, she admitted, the simple confession containing layers of uncertainty beyond mere destination. I've spent 7 years defining myself by what happened, by who he was at his worst. I'm not sure who I am without that anger. Miguel pulled away from the curb, merging into the morning traffic. The hospital receded in his rearview mirror. My mother used to say that forgiveness is the door, not the destination, he offered. The journey starts on the other side. A ghost of a smile touched Camilla's lips. Your mother sounds wise. She was, Miguel agreed. She survived the Salvadoran Civil War by learning that hatred is too heavy to carry across a lifetime. They drove in companionable silence for several minutes, the city waking around them. Finally, Camilla spoke again. I'd like to hear about her sometime. And about Rebecca. She hesitated. And about how you found your way to forgiveness after what my father did. The request surprised Miguel, but not unpleasantly. I'd like that too. As they approached the center of Philadelphia, the morning sun caught the wooden cross on the dashboard, casting a small, perfect shadow between them. Not a division, but a connection point, a beginning. I think I'm ready to go home now, Camilla said quietly. Miguel nodded, understanding that she meant more than just her physical address. He adjusted his course, heading toward the sunrise that promised, if not healing, at least the chance to begin again. The taxi continued through streets now busy with morning commuters, each person carrying their own invisible burdens and hopes. Among them, A yellow cab carried two strangers connected by pain, but traveling, however tentatively, toward grace, the most improbable destination of all. In that moment, Miguel offered a silent prayer, different from his morning ritual of the past 9 years. Not a prayer for patience or strength or even acceptance, but one of gratitude for crossed paths, for second chances, for the mysterious ways that brokenness could lead to wholeness if given the chance. Beside him, Camilla reached out hesitantly and touched the wooden cross with a single finger, as if testing whether it would burn. When it didn't, she let her hand rest beside it on the dashboard, not quite embracing faith, but no longer actively rejecting it either. "Thank you," she said simply, the words encompassing more than the ride. Miguel smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. "De nada," he replied. "We all need a lift sometimes." The yellow taxi turned onto Camilla's street, carrying its passengers toward an unwritten future where judgment had given way to understanding, and the heavy burden of righteous anger had been exchanged for the lighter, if more complex, weight of compassion. Sometimes, Miguel reflected as he pulled up in front of Camilla's apartment building, the longest journeys happen in the shortest distances, from the back seat to the front, from stranger to friend, from vengeance to forgiveness, from judgment to grace. The taxi came to a stop, but neither passenger nor driver made any immediate move to end the journey. Some arrivals, after all, are just beginnings in disguise.